And
Spies.
so it's in chapter 13, sentence 1, the text begins, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. And the Lord spoke to Moshe saying, Shlach lecha anashim, which literally means send you men, v'yaturu et eretz Canaan, so that they may scout the land of Canaan, asher ani noten livnei Yisrael, which I am giving to the children of Israel. As usual, Shuli has it up there. Shuli had chapter 11, and then this is going to be chapter 12. Ish echad lemate avotav tishlachu kol nosi bahem. You shall send one man, one for every tribe. Everyone is going to be considered a leader amongst the people. Now, we're very, very familiar with this story. And the story is that, as usual, I'm wrong, Shuli. It's chapter 13, sentence 1. I'm so sorry. Let me explain to everyone. I have a book here. On the right side, they have the chapters as they exist now. Lance, this is your kind of Torah, my dear Lance Cohen. On the left side, there was an attempt to demarcate the chapters in a Jewish way. Let me back up for a moment. The Talmud tells us that the sentences, the beginning of a sentence and what makes it the end of a sentence, that was done by none other than Moses himself. But the chapters that we have, chapter 1 in Genesis, chapter 2, believe it or not, they were actually done by Christians. The chapters that we have throughout the Pentateuch that we go by are designated by Christians. And they were Jewish scholars who said enough, because sometimes by the way you mark the beginning or the end of a chapter says a lot of the way you're interpreting the chapter. And so there was an attempt to give the chapter Jewish numbers, how we would interpret it. And so I'm looking at a Bible now where on the right side, they have the chapters as we have it, the way the Christians demarcated it. And on the left side, it's the way we would like to have delineated it. However, it didn't work, because in the world of scholarship, your chapters really have to be the same chapters universally. So there's a lot of discussion about this, but we generally use the chapters that were delineated by the Christian community. That's the reality. So when I was mentioning a chapter, I was looking on the left side, Shuli, but on the right side, it's going to be chapter 13. So
should we look at them again?
You can get it up there again. It's the famous story where God says to Moses, Shlach lecha nashim, here it is, send out people, the Yaturu et Eretz Canaan, and they will scout the land of Canaan. And God tells them, first of all, they're all enumerated, and in sentence 17, the instructions are given. What are the instructions? Vayishlach otam Moshe, here it is. And so, as God commanded, it's not really that clear that God commanded. Maybe Moses requested that God command and all of that. It's written a little bit differently in Deuteronomy. And so, the scholars would say they're two different texts, and we would say, well, they're complementing each other, but that's not where I want to go. Vayishlach otam Moshe. Moshe sent them, Latur et Eretz Canaan. This is now sentence 17. Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, and he tells them how they are to scout it. It's like you're going to Israel. Well, you go to Israel, you're going to be landing in Ben Gurion in Tel Aviv, and then you're going to decide, are you going to stay in Tel Aviv that night? Are you first going to go to Jerusalem? He tells them, bearing in mind that they were somewhere in the desert down south around the Sinai, he says to the scouts, Alu Zeba Negev, you'll be coming up through the north and go up, go traverse, go up north. And then he says, Uri'item et ha'aretz mahi, in sentence 18, you'll see the land, you'll see what it is like. The et ha'am hayoshev aleh, and the people who live in it. Harafeh, hama'at, hu hechazak hu harafeh, hama'at hu imrav. You're going to see, you'll get a sense, you're the spies. Is it strong? Is it weak? Are they few or are they many? Tell us a little bit about the land itself. Does it yield produce? Hatova hi imra, is it good? Is it bad? In sentence 20, haaretz hashmenahi imrazahi, and what is the nature of the land? Is it fat? Is it lean? Have trees or not? V'hit chazaktem, and Moshe says, be strong. Ulekachtem mipri haaretz, and take from the fruits of the land, and we'll see what it's all like. And then in sentence 21, vaya'alu vayaturu et haaretz, and they went north and they spied out the land. So we have the order to go, and then we have Moshe literally dictating how they are to go up and what they are to look for, and then return with a report. A first observation that the word to spy generally is a meragel, meraglim. That's not the language that's used here. It doesn't say, and go liragel et haaretz. Liragel comes from the word regel. Regel means feet, because in those days, they may have been on an animal, but they were on their feet as they went to spy out the land. Rather, the verb which is used over and over is viyaturu. It's a very strange term. Go, Moses says, latur et haaretz, latur et haaretz. A lot of discussion about why is there a deflection from the use of the word leragel to latur. My sense is that latur is similar to the word Torah. And Moses is warning them that this is not such a simple mission. And when you go, try to keep the foundational ideas of the Torah in mind, since it's going to be a very, very difficult trip. And indeed, we're told in sentence 22 that they go. Now we're given a description. And they come to Hebron, not an easy place to be in these days. And then it says that they go up to a little river of Eshkol, what is it called here in sentence? Ad Nachal Eshkol, it's the canal of Eshkol. So there they are. And then we're told that they return. So let's take a look at what happens when they return. We're now in sentence 26. In sentence 26, it says, Vayahu, they went, and they came to Moses and Aaron, and they came to all the people, Vayashivu otam dava vekola ida, and they responded with the report. Sentence 27, if we have it there. Sentence 27, here it is. Vayisaprulo vayomru, and this is what they said. Ba'u el ha'aretz asher shalchtanu. We came to the land. V'gam zabat chalavu devash he v'zer piriya. And we came there, and v'gam, we came to the land, and it does indeed. V'gam, it's flowing with milk and honey. And then in the very next sentence comes the key word, and that's sentence 28. and that's the word Ephes. Ephes means but. Ephes, but, yes, it's flowing with milk and honey, they say. But Ephes ki az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz. The nations that are settled in the land, they are strong. They ha'arim bitzurot gedolot ma'od, and the cities are large and they're fortified. The gam yilidei ha'anak ra'inu sham, and we saw the children of the anak, of the giants there. First of all, if I can face everyone, I love the word but. You can almost tell the way a person is reporting by these small little words. It's sort of like listening to any of the news outlets from Fox to CNN, MSNBC, whether you're conservative, liberal, right, left, whatever it may be. If you listen closely to the words of the newscaster, just a little word could turn what's supposed to be an objective report into a subjective report. I love the words where they come back and they say, in sentence 27, we don't have to flash it, I've read it. They say, we came to the land, Vigam, that word Vigam. And also Gam, the rabbis say, is always added to Vigam, and it's also. So it's sort of like, what would it be like? It would be like that moment I remember years back when Ariel Sharon spoke at the synagogue. The place was packed. Sharon is speaking. And I remember I had the zechut to introduce him. The place was mamish packed. I remember that there was some people inside in the back, and they interrupted Sharon. I still remember Bernie Glickman escorting them not so very nicely out. But anyway, this is Sharon, and this was in the early 80s, maybe mid 80s. I think he was suing Time magazine for defamation, whatever. I introduced him as the fearless soldier, as the fearless general. He is the head of the army. After all, in the Yom Kippur War, on the fourth day of the war, it looked so solemn for Israel, and against all odds and against all orders, he threw pontoon bridges across the Suez Canal, and he crossed it. He crosses it. And I said, this man has no fear. He gets up, and as soon as he gets up, first, when he was interrupted, he took off his jacket. He said, I guess I got to take off my jacket. And then he looks at me and he says, Kavod Harav, which means honored rabbi. Now, I learned that night, when somebody addresses you, honored rabbi, duck. And he went into a whole big deal and he said, do you really think I wasn't afraid? Of course I had fear. Only fools don't have fear. Yeah. Of course, his greatness was that he went forward despite his fear. Fear is an emotion. No one can control an emotion. Feelings are not right. They're not wrong. They just are. We can't control our feelings, but we can control our actions. And the truth is, the military person who is brave is not the one who goes to war and is not afraid. I'm not sure that exists, because then you're going with your emotion. It's when you act against what you feel like doing. Who is the real benefactor? It's not the one for whom money doesn't mean anything, but one for whom money does mean something, and you want to hold on to your money for whatever reason. Notwithstanding the feeling of wanting to hold on, you do something which is contrary. You act against what you feel. And so here in our text, it says that they come back and they say, Vigam, and also, and they go on to say, it's Eretz Zavat Cholavu Devash. I see that word Vigam like addressing Sharon and saying, Kavod Harav, Vigam. There's something in that. Be careful, the exaggeration up front. And indeed, after they come back and they say it's a land flowing with milk and honey, and one wonders, is that really true? Is Israel flowing with milk and honey? But then they say, Ephes, but But, well, that but is a very subjective term. But means get ready. You're going to be hearing a negative, and the negative most often after the but, most often it overpowers all of the positives. As a student of speaking, I often listen to different preachers, and some of these Southern evangelical preachers are really something. It just falls into my head. I remember one gave a talk at his church, was called But, and basically went along the lines, you want to do the right thing, you want to believe, but you don't have time. You want to do the right thing, you want to believe, but you're too busy at business to pay attention. But. He went through all kinds of excuses. And then the line that I never forgot was, he looks out at everyone and he screams out, that's your problem. That's our problem. Our butts get in the way. Okay, so you see, that was a ridiculous line, but it's a one that I still remember to this day. Some of the lines I remember are the most ridiculous. So here they say Ephes, but this is what the commentaries say. The but showed the subjectivity. Ki az ha'am hayoshev ba'aretz. They're strong. The cities are fortified. And we looked at the people, and they were the children of giants. And then they said, Amalek Yoshev be'eretz hanegev. The Amalekites, they're in the south. And Israel knew who the Amalekites were, because we're told that as soon as we left Egypt, the Amalekites, they were the people who had attacked us. And the Hittites and the Jebusites, Jerusalem, before it was Jerusalem, it was under the control of the Jebusites. The Amorites, they're in the mountains. And the Canaanites, they're on the sea and they're near the Jordan River. My goodness sakes, they're saying that basically, they're saying that they're the strongest. Vayas Kalev et Ha'am el Moshe. But Kalev, he was Joshua's partner. He quiets the people and he says, Alone na'aleh. We're going to be able to do it. And we're going to inherit the land. I'm translating. We will be able to be successful and overcome. But ve'anashim asher alu imo amru, but the people who went up said, Lo nuchal lalot et ha'am. We're not el ha'am. We are not going to be able to ascend against these people. Ki chazak hu mimenu, because they are stronger than us. And actually, mimenu can also be first person plural. Third person singular. Ki chazak hu mimenu, because they are stronger than, third person singular, they are stronger than God. So there you have it. They come back with this negative report, and they laying out how it's a completely fortified place. And then Caleb jumps in and says, that may be true, but we're going to be able to be successful. And then they respond and say, no, lo nuchal. We can't do it. Lo nuchal lalot et ha'am. And one of the key matters we should be thinking about is, what was wrong with their report? They came back and reported as honestly as they could. Well, one could suggest the problem with their report was not that they said that the people are strong there, it's going to be difficult to penetrate. No, that would be fine. But the problem with their report is that they offered a subjective reaction, not only giving what the lay of the land was, but then they said, we will not be able to overcome. They spoke evilly about the land. And then they say, we saw there the angels. And let's take a look at sentence 33. And I want to concentrate upon that for a moment. V'sham ra'inu et hanefilin. Sentence 33, the last sentence of chapter 13. V'sham ra'inu et hanefilin. And there we saw the giants, B'nai Anak, the children of the giants, Min HaNefilim, from the word Nephilim. Nephilim comes from the word Nafal, because when you looked at them, they were so large you would fall in fear. And then they say, this is a beautiful expression, Vanehi ve'einenu kachagavim. And we looked in our eyes, we looked like grasshoppers. Chagav is a grasshopper. Vanehi, and we were ve'einenu, in our eyes, kachagavim, as grasshoppers. V'chein hayinu be'einehem. And so did we look to them. If I can face everyone, I'm interested in that expression for a moment. We were, in our eyes, we felt like grasshoppers. And so too, we were in our sight as grasshoppers, and so were we in their sight. And so here's the question, just for a few moments, that I want to deal with, and that is the following. It's one thing for them to return and say, we felt weak, we felt overpowered. We were looking at an enemy that's very strong, and we felt tiny. We felt small. We felt so small that we felt like we were grasshoppers. It's one thing for them to say, straight out, they say, Vanehi ve'einenu kachagavim, and we were in our eyes as grasshoppers, because they knew what they felt. But how does one explain the chen hayinu be'einehem? We were as grasshoppers in our eyes, and so were we in their eyes. How do we know the way they perceived us? Now, let me give you the most often offered interpretation, which is found in the Midrash. It's quoted by Rashi. On its simplest level, those two fragments are considered independent of each other. They're independent thoughts. And so here's the way one would explain it. The spies note that compared to these giants, they felt like grasshoppers. That was their first reaction. Independent of their own feelings, the Talmud says, it's a Talmud in Sota, they actually heard the inhabitants looking down from up on high, because they were giants. And the inhabitants of Canaan were saying, there are grasshoppers on the ground. In other words, they heard them say, talking about the spies, these giants, from their mouths, they heard them say, they could see them looking down to the ground, and they're saying there are grasshoppers on the ground. In the words of Rashi, we heard them, the giants, saying, there are ants, there are grasshoppers who look like humans in the vineyard. And I'd like to stop here just for a moment and ask you whether you have some thoughts on this sentence. Again, let's a quick summary. God says, at least here in the book of Numbers, Moses sent out the spies. The spies are listed, and these are new names. We've not seen these names before. These are not the heads of the tribes. They're rather people picked who are the strongest from each, designated to spy the land. Moses tells them how they're to go on the tour, whether it's the old American Jewish Congress tour or Mizrahi tour. This is the way you do. You come up in the south, yada, yada, yada. And Moses tells them what they're to look for. See, is it a strong people? Is it a weak people? They come back. And the part of the report that was objectively correct was, they say, we saw a very strong people. Where they stepped beyond their mandate was the way they were talking about the negativity, using the word FS, but That's one word that can turn around a whole report from being objective to giving you a sense of what they were feeling on a kind of editorial basis. And they come back and they say it's very strong, and then they overstep. Moses never asked them to come back to say whether they can liberate the land or not. He just wanted a straight report. God had promised no matter what, he'll liberate the land. The spying was to know what to expect, but they come back and say, we can't do it. We're not going to be able to do it. Joshua says we can do it. They say we can't do it. Back and forth, back and forth. And then in the final moment of the report, so the Torah tells us that they spoke evilly about the land, and we saw the giants, and we felt like grasshoppers. And so we know that we were in their sight as grasshoppers. How did they know what they were thinking of them? So the Rashi interpretation is they heard the giants all the way up there, all 15 feet of them saying, oh, down there on the ground level, there are grasshoppers, there are ants. So we felt like grasshoppers, and so were they in our sight. I want to stop here and ask if anybody has an alternative interpretation to Rashi's interpretation.
Classic projection. Classic psychological projection.
Is that
That's
Brian?
Daniel Langer.
Classic
Danny?
psychological projection.
So could you explain what you mean?
They feel something, and whatever their emotion is, that they figure the other people think the same way. If you think yourself as being ugly, you think other people are looking at you and seeing you as ugly. So
Excellent.
it's your
Excellent.
self-perception of yourself you project onto other people and think that they think the same way.
Excellent, Daniel, as usual. Excellent thought. Is that your own thought, or Daniel, you just picked it up from the text?
No, that's life experience.
Life experience. So it's your thought. Anyone else have any?
Yeah, we have some hands up. We have Lance, Tova, Ruby so far.
Okay, Lance, please.
Okay, here's a question for you, Rav Avi. What is the one text in English literature that talks about giants and grasshoppers?
Okay.
Gulliver's Travels.
Yes. Yes.
Second question. When does the manna end?
I'm listening with open ears.
Chapter 5, book of Joshua. Third
Yes.
question. Third question.
So far, I'm
What-
batting 100.
what is the meaning? Where does the first instance of the word Satan occur in the Torah?
It's a great question. I don't know.
Numbers 22:22. Now let me go back and talk about this. Okay.
Okay.
Because there is an alternative interpretation to the spies. And the alternative interpretation of the spies is you have two worlds. One world is a world in which all of your needs, every problem that you have, is taken care of by God or your parents. The other interpretation is that there is a world in which you are challenged every day with all kinds of problems. And Arnie and I know those problems. And the challenge is to figure out how you can best handle the obstacles that God places in your way. Okay, now the manna ends in the promised land, and it ends with Joshua. Joshua enters the promised land, and he he has that Paschal lamb sacrifice. And after the Paschal lamb sacrifice, what happens? The manna ends. Now, that's not a coincidence. It's not incidental. It's crucial, because that's the point at which Joshua really takes over and enters the real world. And if you think about the spies, while Caleb is usually representing the minority opinion, it's Joshua who's the key here. And Joshua is the link between the desert, the wilderness, which is really a magical place, and the promised land, which is not. It's not a magical place. It's a place of everyday life, of trials and tribulations. Further, you could argue that leaving the Garden of Eden is leaving that utopian place where there are no challenges, no problems, and it's good. It's good that Adam and Eve leave the Garden of Eden. So this is a totally, for me anyway, when I read about this is a totally radically different interpretation from what we normally hear. And I must tell you that the interpretation of Satan is by a rabbi named Skobek, who represents Jews for Judaism. And the man, I think I made up myself. And of course, Gulliver's Travels deals with both. Gulliver is both big and little in the same experience. In other words, he handles both sides of the coin, so to speak. It's bipolar, really, if you want to go back to, the psychological of it.
Lance, I really love your interpretation. You're almost, it sounds to me like you're painting the desert. I'm not going to come back to Daniel thought in a moment, but Lance, it's almost like you're saying it's so counterintuitive that the desert was almost Edenic, you're saying, because everything is done for us.
Yes.
And now the spies are being sent in, and it's a whole new horizon for them. And of course, they come
spies
back and
do not want to leave the world in which they're comfortable.
Right. Interesting.
And the Caleb and Joshua want to leave that world and go off on their own.
That is what Rabbi Sachs quoting the Schneerson, that they were afraid of freedom. They wanted to go back, everything was taken care of. That's why they said, we'll go back to Egypt. We're afraid of being free, which is exactly
yes. In that article, there's an article Rabbi Sachs has about the spies, which I read recently. And basically, he's saying that in Judaism, we want to bring heaven on earth in a sense that we don't want to strive to some higher place where we sit in a cloud all day and drink pina coladas. We want to deal with the real world, and we want to try to make it as good a place as we can. But that's the challenge. It's a challenge for Rabbi Sachs, and it's the challenge for, I'm glad you brought up Rabbi Sachs. I love Rabbi Sachs, and I think about him every day.
The Rabbi Sachs also mentions the word, Rabbi Weiss mentioned at the beginning, Latour. That word was used to correspond to the command, what tzitzit.
Lo taturu acharei levavechem. Yes, but I just love the expansion of the horizons and what you're saying. And when you think about it, while establishing our sovereignty in Israel and finally, with God's help, being in control of our own destiny is a Zionist dream, I could see someone saying, oh boy, that's a lot of responsibility to assume. Sovereignty, and basically it's a democracy, but it's a Jewish democracy. It's a Jewish homeland. Well, in establishing a Jewish homeland, there's tremendous responsibility that we would assume maybe we're better off when we don't have that sovereignty. Maybe we're better off when we are living in the diaspora. Of course, the counter argument is we've not done that well in the diaspora. There has hardly been a country where we've been in over thousands of years that we've not been thrown out of. And I do want to read to you just a piece from Torat Ahavah, which touches upon what was just said, Daniel. Another thought comes to mind. This is beyond Rashi. Perhaps going back to the two clauses can be viewed as a single unit, with the latter phrase emerging from the former. Indeed, the way we see ourselves often prompts our feelings about others' perceptions of us. For example, a person who feels lowly may sense that others look down upon her or him. Conversely, if we feel good about ourselves, we perceive others to see us in the same light. With this principle in mind, we can understand the verse. The spies, as a matter of fact, proclaimed, "We were in our sight as grasshoppers." And as a consequence, and so were we in their sight. We felt small. And the way one feels, that is our perception of the way others feel about ourselves. Now, I want to take it a step further, just one step further, and argue that the way we feel about ourselves is not only what we think others feel about us. It's not just a perception. What we feel about ourselves is not only what we perceive others feel about us, but in fact is what they will feel about us. It's very, very different. It's close, but it's a step further. If I feel down, if I feel low, it's not just that I perceive others will see me as I see myself, but indeed others will see me, not just perceive me to be in this state. Again, let me say this. What we feel about ourselves is not only what we perceive others feel about us, but is in fact what they feel about us. Feeling negative about oneself thus becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we lose confidence in ourselves, others ipso facto will lose confidence in us. If I walk around feeling sickly, that's the way we're going to be. Not only do we perceive others will see us, that's the way others will see us. If I view myself as growing older and therefore feeling less kind of useless, that is the way society is going to view me. And so the spies say, we felt like grasshoppers. And guess what? If you feel like a grasshopper, other people are going to view you as a grasshopper as well. If you go into a room confident, others are going to feel that confidence. Now, of course, I want to quickly say that self-confidence is not conceit. Self-confidence is not conceit. Every morning in the prayer service, there are several blessings that we recite, but without getting into those details, in those blessings, there is a distinction between self-confidence and conceit. Conceit, haughtiness, is ga'ava. Ga'ava. No one should feel that sense of, the Boston Celtic player. I think I've mentioned him to you when he put in 4 3-pointers, and they interviewed him and said, well, how did you do it? You had been missing and you put in 4 straight. He said, well, I'm one of the greatest basketball players in the world. No. That's ga'ava. That's haughtiness. That's not a good thing. Ge'ut is self-confidence. And having self-confidence is a positive characteristic. And that was the issue, I think, the personality, the psychological issue with the spies. They lacked that self-confidence, which is reflected not only in their self-perceptions, but also in others' perceptions, and indeed what others will think of us. And that's the teaching for today. Yes, if you go into a place and you feel lowly, like a grasshopper, useless, incapable of doing, that's the way others are going to see you. Others are going to see you in the same vein. Let me stop here and get your reaction. And
Tova's hand and Ruby's hand have already been up patiently.
okay, please.
Tova, you're muted.
First
There you
of
go.
I think that the spies were realistic, but we have lived this in our own time with the start of the state of Israel, where military experts, everybody told Ben-Gurion, if we declare a state, there is no way that we can win that war. We have less than a 50-50 chance of winning.
Yes.
And that was the reality. And yet he said, but we have to do this. And I think that it's just a replay of what happened with the Meraglim.
Yes. And I do want
to also, he saw that they were Anakim and Israel was, a group of ex-slaves. And he said, realistically, this is the situation, but idealistically, we're going to try. We had that in our own time.
Yes.
And did they see us? Did the Arabs see us as grasshoppers? Absolutely, because then they told their people, leave your homes so that the field is free for us. We don't have to worry about you, because there is no way that we're not going to conquer this land and you'll be back in your homes. They saw it just as the military experts on our side saw it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're in Efrat, which is in Gush Etzion. I'm trying to find out if anybody has information. Even the 47 armistice, this is before the 48 war, I think Gush Etzion was in our hands. I think it was. I'm pretty sure. And in the war, the day before Ben-Gurion, Tova, am I right? The day before he declared the state, Gush Etzion fell, and those caravans were attacked. I think during the war, over 200 people were killed trying to defend Gush Etzion. That's why in '67, the next generation returned. It became a very, very big deal. So it took a lot on Ben-Gurion's part. I'm sure he was under a lot of pressure not to announce it, especially because of what happened in Gush Etzion. It was a tremendous loss on the day before. So I appreciate that as usual, Tova. Ruby, did you want to share?
Yes, we mentioned that the enemies that their perceptions we felt very small, and there's self-fulfilling finding predictions and so forth. But I think it's equally important for us to know the enemy's perceptions of us in order for us to proceed successfully. We have to know their perceptions. To say that their perceptions are right or wrong, okay, we can argue the point. But I think it's very important for us to know their perceptions, because otherwise we may just be proceeding in a very foolish manner or not particularly successful manner.
No, I think that's beautifully said. In other words, Stanley always had this rule, Ruby, which is a rule I think about always. He always said to me that before, Stanley, of course, is Ruby's late husband, who had an enormous influence on my life. There's not a few days go by that I don't quote Stanley, but he always said that when you're facing a major decision, think about your exposure. Think about how you're exposed, where you're vulnerable, and be honest, as you're saying, Ruby, about that vulnerability. Try to understand what you're up against and be honest. And I'm hearing you say that it's important to know the perception. That doesn't mean you don't go on, but you don't want to be blindsided. You want to know what by the way, I follow this since Stanley said that, I follow it now for decades. Before we started Chovevei Torah or Rabbah, I said to myself, what's my exposure? What's my vulnerability? I don't think I could have imagined it was gonna be what happened when Sarah became a rabbi. That was like beyond anything I could have imagined. But I think you said it very well, Ruby.
I mean, we can argue whether they were right or wrong. But
Right.
if we don't
But you have to
understand
know it
fully
enough.
what their perception of us, then how are we going to proceed and be
Right.
successful? I guess
Right.
that's my bottom line.
Right. And I think that's beautifully said. I do want to read to you just a sentence from the Proverbs from Mishlei. Panim kipanim. It's Proverbs 27:19. No need to flash it. The English translation is, as face answers to face in water, so does one person's heart to another. It's interesting. As face answers to face in water. Imagine our faces, we're looking into water. And what do we see? We see a reflection of ourselves. As face answers to face in water, so does one's person's heart to another. And this is what Rashi says. Rashi says that if one is pleasant and gracious, so is one's reflection. And such is what others reflect back to us as well. And if one is pained and angry, the reflection is such. Something to think about. If what he's trying to say, I think, is that what we feel about ourselves is like us looking into water, and that's what others. It's. I think a lot of the world is a world where it's good for people to feel good about themselves if one can. I fully understand that at times, and there are days and moments that's difficult, but I think it's a good psychological insight, not to be, God forbid, boisterous, kind of conceited about oneself. That's not a positive, that's a terrible negative. But to feel good about oneself. And if we feel good about ourselves, I think our whole approach to the world will be different. That's the way others are going to see us. Sometimes it's hard for people to interact with somebody who's always feeling down, even though there's a responsibility to be there for those who are vulnerable. We're going to end in a few moments, maybe just another, Arnie, please, by all means.
Rabbi, we also have Phil Brief and Miriam waiting. So after Arnie, let's go to Phil and Miriam. And then if there's time, we have the Fatmans.
And myself too, please.
So
And Judy. So Arnie first.
yeah, so I just want to pick up on what Lance and others have mentioned about how it was kind of perfect outside the land. Everything was given to the people, and they were, well taken care of. But in the land, they had to deal with things. So now, if we look at nowadays, a Jew can live in America, make a lot of money, have a sleek life, and grow fat and good, and have no worries. And yet in the land, look what's going on now. I mean, you talk about Shiloh and Janine, and inside the land itself, the people are fighting over the judicial stuff and the crime in the Arab sections. There's so much reality, it can overwhelm you. So I guess what I'm saying is that it's not just in the Bible, it's happening right now if we just open up our eyes to it.
Yes. Thank you, Arnie. Thank you.
I mean, what are people saying about all the violence in the West Bank now?
I think, look, I've not taken a survey, Arnie, so I would imagine that I would pray, and I think this is true for the mainstream. For me, nothing justifies such actions. Whatever your claim may be, you may claim that this is your land. Nothing justifies walking up to a car and just shooting and murdering innocent people. Nothing justifies that. So I would pray that's the case. And except for people very, very far to the extreme left, who would say you got what you deserve because you're there and you shouldn't be there. I'd like to think it's what I've said, that even those who would disagree with me politically understand you can't walk up to Lucy D and just murder her and her 2 children. You know, the truth of the matter is, Arnie, that if we were to speak to the 19 people on those planes that went into the Twin Towers and ask them why they did what they did, they would justify it. They would say that America and the West, they were taking over Islam, taking over whatever Saudi Arabia, since most of them came from Saudi Arabia. They would justify it. They would justify it. Well, nothing justifies taking planes into the Twin Towers. Nothing. Nada. Nothing. And until the world understands that, terror is going to reign supreme. And that's the big battle today. But Arnie, well said as usual. So just a few more comments, because I know I'm being pulled out here. We have the great honor of Gaya Bernstein. Hold on, Zalman. Hold on, Zalman. Gaya Bernstein, who she just finished a beautiful poetic commentary on the Psalms that was translated into Hebrew by our dear Dr. Victor Shenan. And they're presenting in some fancy place tonight in Jerusalem. So we're on our way out in a minute. So Shuli, you are the...
So Phil and Miriam Young have both been waiting patiently. So I think we
Okay.
should get them.
Okay.
So Phil,
Yeah.
you're muted now.
Can
You'll
I
need...
say something eventually?
if we have time, of course. We're just running short of time today.
Okay.
Phil, can you unmute yourself? You're muted.
myself?
I can't, Phil, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Phil.
Yeah, hello.
There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So what Rabbi Weiss just said is perfectly correct. But here in Israel, I hear a commentator saying, if we only enrich the people in Gaza, we'll have peace. All they want is to be wealthy too. And that's such nonsense. The 19 people who flew into the towers in 9/11 were all well-to-do engineers. They weren't poor people. And the Muslims are killing 1,000 non-Muslims every month since 9/11. And nobody gives a damn because it's not in Europe, it's not in America, it's not in Israel, but it's in Africa or Asia. So there's no mosque there, there's no occupation, but they're still killing people. And they were killing us before we had a state. So this idea that suddenly we're going to make them wealthy and they'll be like us is wrong. That's all I had to say.
Hello?
Rav Avi, you are muted, and it's
I'm
Miriam's
saying that,
turn.
thank you, Phil, thank you. And my children are pulling me, but I think there's one more comment. Is
I
it
think that
Miriam?
would be
Something?
Miriam for today.
I can't
Yes,
say something?
excuse me, just let me mention this before it's too late. I'm just going back to the text a little bit in terms of the choice of those others who accompanied Caleb and Yoshua. They were leaders of their clans, their tribes, whatever denomination or unit you want to refer to. And one would think that they would have the self-confidence of a leader. After all, they were
Yeah.
chosen and they were kept and they were listened to, I assume, and they were followed when they were all in the desert, in the wilderness, following Moshe. So it's a little bit anomalous to say that you needed more self-confidence. If they didn't have self-confidence, who did?
Yeah. Miriam, I
Okay,
think that's
can I say
great.
something?
I think that's a great comment, Miriam. And it's something I never saw. My reaction is just from, from life experiences, exactly what you said, Miriam. You would think that such individuals would have the self-confidence, but you never know. You
Can I say
never
something?
know. Sometimes it
May
is
I
the
add something?
case
May I add something?
that those who seem to be the strongest when they're faced with the challenge, sometimes those whom you least suspect have the courage, and those who you think have the courage, they don't. But it's a great point, Miriam. You would think that leaders, look, there are all kinds of rumors. I don't want to say anything bad. There are rumors about Rabin, 67, that he went into some kind of psychological funk. You never know. You never know.
Can I say something? May I add something?
Yes, something briefly, my dear Zalman.
Okay. Who was the first? The tribe of Judah, the whole tribe of Judah had great people because in the beginning of Numbers, and even in Exodus, the first guy to jump into the water to the Sea of Reeds was Nachshon. He was. They could have used Nachshon too, but he only got Caleb. They were both in the same tribe of Judah. That's why Judah is the thing. I'm gonna tell you something on a personal level. When I was in the 10 years old, because I couldn't swim, jump into the water. So I jumped into the water, and I was trying to tread water, and I thought I was going to drown. And one guy said, "Didn't do it." Another guy, another counselor, saved my life. I took a chance, and so that's what Nachshon did. Nachshon was before Caleb in the same tribe. In the beginning of Numbers, Nachshon was a leader. He was the guy that jumped into the water with the Sea of Reeds. So they had the tribe of Judah was the real tribe. They had a lot of good people in that tribe. That's all. I don't know about but I know that Nachshon's tribe of Judah. That's why Judah is one of the great leaders of the Jewish people. That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. Why was Nachshon Caleb? Caleb became a different part of that tribe, but Nachshon was the first one who jumped into the water in the beginning. Remember that? Okay, that's what I say. Okay. You hear me? I don't know if I said it. Okay.
Yeah, we hear
Okay.
you, but I actually think Rav Avi's being pulled away. So I'm just going to say goodbye to everybody, and he'll see you next
Bye.
week.